All right, picking up here, last part of guided discussion number 10, hopefully. Let's talk about Nixon and Vietnamization. I can't say that word very easily. It's 1969 is the year that this takes place. Upon becoming president in 1969, Nixon implemented a policy known as Vietnamization. Oh, terrible. Under this policy, the U.S. would try to do three things. Number one, they would eventually, all U.S. ground troops would leave Vietnam, and the South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, would be left to fight their own war. Number two, the U.S. would continue to give South Vietnam all the money and the military supplies needed to fight. And number three, U.S. U.S. planes would continue to bomb northern Vietnam. Um, Not sure what your thoughts are about this, but I think it sounds familiar to some of the stuff we even see today. Um, Nixon comes out with this idea in 1969. The same year, in Vietnam, there's the My Lai massacre of 1969. Um, in November of 1969, it became known to the public that in 1968, the U.S. soldiers had engaged in a brutal massacre in the village of My Lai, in South Vietnam. Basically, American soldiers had entered the village looking for the Viet Cong, only to find women, children, and older men. They went on a killing spree, killing some 350 civilians, including herding them into a ditch and killing them. The military then tried to cover up what happened by saying that the U.S. soldiers had entered the village and killed 128 Viet Cong. News of the massacre shocked Americans. Another important part here, so that was 1969. Of course, it happened in 68, but it comes out in 69. In 1970, President Nixon became concerned that the Viet Cong and the Northern Vietnam Army were using the neutral country of Cambodia to stage attacks against U.S. forces and ARVN forces. So on April 29th of 1970, Nixon ordered American troops to invade Cambodia. The result was that it brought Cambodia into the war, and it failed because communist troops simply pulled back deeper into Cambodian territory. The invasion of Cambodia sparked nationwide protests. One of these protests occurred at Kent State University in Ohio, and it prompted Ohio's Governor James Rhodes to send the National Guard to keep peace. In what became known as the Kent State Massacres, or the Kent State Massacre, not massacres, massacre, National Guard troops fired at students, throwing rocks at them, killing 4 students and wounding 10. At least 2 of those killed were innocent bystanders passing between classes. This overall idea of what's taking place in Vietnam leads to a decreasing morale in troops. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was a considerable decreasing amount of morale in the U.S. troops of the Vietnam War. Some examples of this included that the drug use became very commonplace. Heroin usage rose up to 22% of U.S. forces by 1971. A number of U.S. troops refused to go on combat missions. And there's also fragging, which was the killing of officers by their own men, greatly increased during this time period. Meanwhile, the Pentagon Papers of 1971, this guy named Daniel Ellsberg, a former Defense Department employee, leaked the Pentagon Papers to the press. The Pentagon Papers had drawn from secret government documents, discussed the history of the Vietnam War, and basically they showed that the U.S. government had been lying to the American people about what was really going on in Vietnam. They were very critical of the U.S. policies regarding the involvement of the U.S. in Vietnam. And so in December, Nixon, and the end of the war here, we're on to, In December of 1972, Nixon ordered a massive 2-week bombing of the major cities in North Vietnam in order to get the North Vietnam to agree to a ceasefire. Nixon's National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger helped frame the final statement, the Paris Accords, and they were signed on January 27th of 1973. Basically, the terms of the agreement were as follows. Nearly all the U.S. ground troops would be withdrawn. Number 2 was that Communist forces, North Vietnamese troops here, would be, North Vietnamese troops, backtrack, number 2, Communist forces, aka North Vietnamese troops, would be allowed to stay in South Vietnam and be part of a coalition government there. Some 145,000 North Vietnamese troops stayed in South Vietnam. And number 3, some 560 U.S. prisoners of war would be returned. As it turns out, many POWs from the war would not be returned and are still unaccounted for. Or some are even, maybe they're still over there, I don't know. That's why I see Palmyra, prisoners of war missing in action. Therefore, the Vietnam War officially ended for the United States in 1973. However, in early 1975, North Vietnam attacked the South, and communists took over South Vietnam, unifying the country and making it all communist. Now, Gerald Ford, who we'll learn a little bit about here in chapter 39, he took over for Nixon after the resignation, and he asked for military aid to save South Vietnamese from collapse when this happened in 1975, but Congress refused. The U.S. went to Vietnam to stop communism, yet communism took over the entire country in 1975, and this war ends up becoming, I guess, a loss. Alright, that's it. Going to bed.